Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I'm your host, Callie Wright, and today we are having a talk about allyship. Starting next Monday, September 28th through October 2nd, GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, is sponsoring a week of dialogue about what it means to be an LGBT ally and how we can encourage others to speak up with us, not for us or over us. So this week I'm going to bring you a few different discussions on the topic of allyship. I invited a listener of the show and a new friend named Celeste on to have a discussion about what allyship means to us as trans women. And I invited my dear friend Bobby C. from the No Religion Required podcast to talk about his journey from having extremely homophobic views to being a passionate and enthusiastic ally for our community, and the role his exit from fundamentalist religion played in that shift. First, a few announcements and reminders. First, I want to give you some sad news. Listeners to the show may have noticed that Daniel hasn't been present in the last few episodes, and for personal reasons, he won't be returning. Daniel is still my adopted big brother, and I love him very, very much. And I am super, super grateful for all the awesome things that he's contributed to this show to make it what it's become. I love you, big brother. And next, a few reminders about some speaking engagements I'll be doing that I would love to meet you at if you'll be in the area. This weekend on September 26th, I'll be speaking at an event in Montgomery, Alabama called V to Shining V, which is a brilliant, brilliant name for an event. It's hosted by the Montgomery Humanists, and it will be to support reproductive health services, which is Montgomery's only abortion provider. I'll have the event link in the show notes for the episode, so if you're listening and you'll be in the Montgomery area this weekend, please stop by, show your support, and say hi. If me being there isn't enough to entice you, there will also be an awesome band and comedy by the one and only Nick Morganmore. I am so stoked to meet him in person for the first time. And and apparently there's going to be a taco bar there too, which is just awesome. The weekend directly after is a weekend I have been waiting anxiously for quite some time. I will be delivering my first talk ever at an atheist conference. The talk is called Gaytheism 101, and basically the idea is to make the case that LGBT activism and secular activism belong together. I'm going to be speaking there among lots of folks that I have some serious love and respect for, like Teresa McBain, Mandisa Thomas, my good friend Bobby C., and with musical entertainment from my new friend Shelly Siegel. I met her at PastaCon last weekend. She is grade A, high-class sweetheart. I love her to death. It's going to be a hell of a time, and especially when I own everyone in the lip sync battle on Saturday night, that's totally going to happen. So you should totally be there if you can. And last but not least, on Saturday, October 24th, I'm going to be speaking at GLSEN's Youth Summit at Northern Kentucky University. I'll be speaking on the subject of the atheist worldview and why secularism and the LGBT community are natural allies. This will be my first talk ever at an LGBT-themed event of this kind, and I'm really stoked to be representing this amazing secular community that's welcomed me into the fold with open arms. So if you're going to be in or near the Northern Kentucky area, come by and see me, say hi. It's a free event that's really, really great to get acquainted with the greater Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky LGBT community. So the subject this week is allyship. And I was originally planning to open the show with a sort of monologue on what allyship looks like and why I think it's important. But I was listening to the latest episode of No Religion Required, and I heard a story that I think is far more important than any rant that I could write about allyship. Caitlin McKenna is a 19-year-old from Salt Lake City, Utah. She was brought up Mormon and realized a few years ago that her faith didn't really make sense anymore. Long story short, her parents didn't handle it well. And the story ends with her not being welcome in her parents' house anymore after dealing with some serious mental health issues and needing lots of help to get back on her feet. So she's been forced to move in with this stranger that she met on the internet, which has apparently been a great situation. But she started a GoFundMe page to help her get her on her feet and start a life of her own for herself. And she's well over her goal already, but I thought I'd share the link anyways. This community has shown me so much love, and just maybe we can send some of that her direction and help her get a good start on her own. So check out GoFundMe.com/justforessentials and throw a couple bucks her way. If you want to hear her story in her own words, check out episode 205 of Dogma Debate and check out the latest episode of No Religion Required. Bobby C. is one of the hosts of the No Religion Required podcast, which is also a part of the Secular Media Network. Bobby and I have become basically like family over the last year or so, and Bobby joins me on the show today. The one, the only Mr. Bobby C. from No Religion Required. Welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, my friend.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
So this episode is about Ally Week, and it is a celebration of allyship and LGBT allies. And when I think of allies who are people that I desperately, desperately love, it is your name is definitely near the top of the list.
Oh.
So when I was on your show a while ago, you had talked about how previously you had some pretty bigoted views towards gay people, towards trans people, and that whole thing kind of turned around for you. So I would love to just hear that story and tell me, where you were, where you are now, and kind of how you got there.
Okay, no, I'll gladly do that for you. The earliest memory I have when it came to anyone that was in the LGBT community was when my mother divorced my father. I was 9 years old, and she moved in with her best friend who had a cousin who's named Maurice. I can talk about him now. He's no longer living, who was gay. Now, I'm 9 years old. I don't know anything really and truly about what's going on as far as LGBT, but I always called him Uncle Maurice. Well, when my mom met my stepdad and he met Maurice for the first time, he started calling him my Aunt Maurice. And I never could understand what's the big deal about, aunt. That makes no sense to me because I didn't see Maurice in that way. He was just a guy, and it never dawned on me. I'm 9 years old. What the hell do I know? Well, as I grew older and became more active in the church and started learning about, the homosexual community and how they are an abomination to God, and I took a hold of that. And that was my driving force for years. I picked on the gay kids in school, talked about it, called them fags and just all these terrible things that I'm now ashamed of. But back then, I was still stuck in my indoctrination, and they were something to be laughed at, made fun of. And I'd never seen a transgendered individual until we started going to the UU church, we'll put it that way, here in Savannah. And it was a guy that, now it's a she, but then it was a guy to me that was dressed in a dress with makeup on, but you can clearly tell that it was a middle-aged man. And I'm sitting there going, you've got to be kidding me. What the hell is wrong with this guy? Is he one of those damn cross-dressing people? What is he, like a damn drag queen or something? I'm not even coming back here anymore. And I hate that I had that view about the LGBT community, because trust me, I'm ashamed of it now. But whenever I finally stepped away from the concept of religion, stepped away from Christianity and moved into Buddhism, into now what is essentially atheism, I started I don't know, my mind my thoughts changed because I went from finding things that was wrong with people, they're sinners bound for hell. And if you're not a Christian, you know what? Hey, you know what? Burn and enjoy it. But I started looking at people as people. It was no longer, oh, that's a gay man. That's, that's a lesbian. That's a transgendered individual. They were people. And when I finally got to the point to where I was meeting, members of the LGBT community for the first time and actually getting to know the person, know their heart, know how they think, and I actually became very good friends with people that were in the LGBT community. That's when my mindset truly, truly changed. It took me meeting someone, getting to know them, enjoying their company before I was like, oh, they're people. And I hate that I was in high school and I never saw them as people. They were nothing more than somebody for me to make fun of. Oh, well, look at the faggot over there. I hate that was who I was then. But I'm very thankful for who I am now because I can love everybody equally. I don't mind standing up. Excuse me. I don't mind standing up for everyone's equal rights. I firmly believe that everybody deserves the right to love and marry the people they love, regardless if it's the same sex, opposite sex. They should have the same exact rights we have, and I'll stand and I'll fight and I'll do everything I can to make sure that they keep the rights that they've been given by the Supreme Court. Now, we know that there are state governments and presidential candidates, Mike Huckabee, who...
God, that guy.
I'm telling you, that is doing everything they can to remove that right. That pisses me off. Just because you don't agree with it does not mean that you have the right to go in and remove whatever right that is given to people just because you disagree with it, just because your holy book says so. That does not give you the right to do it. And I'll stand and I'll fight and I'll let my voice be heard, and I don't give a damn who hears it. I don't care if they like it. You don't like it, don't listen. But the bottom line is people need to know that, hey, this is 2015, folks. Okay, this isn't 1950. Those days are over. And people need to wake up to the reality that now it's all equal. And now everybody has the right. And the crazy bitch, Kim Davis.
Yeah, we've talked extensively about her.
I in one aspect, Callie, I feel sorry for her. I really do, because she's where I was. When I look at Kim, I see where I was years ago. That was me, but in a male form. And I pity her, because one day she's gonna wake up to the same realization that I woke up to. And hopefully she's going to look back and think, wow, what a bitch.
Right. Now, let me ask you this, backing up a little bit.
Sure.
Do you think it's entirely religion that, and losing religion that sort of turned your attitude around? Or do you think that those two things were kind of independent from one another?
That turned me around?
Yeah. So, when you're, when you're finally saying like, wow, like I'm getting to know these gay folks, I'm getting to know these trans folks, and I'm able to see them as human beings. I mean, was it your increasingly liberal view of religion and eventually your coming out of religion that facilitated that? Or do you think that would have happened anyways if you had just gotten to know someone, like with religion really having nothing to do with it in any way?
Well, for me, during my time as a Southern Baptist, I would have never given anyone in the LGBT community even a second of my time to even get to know them. And that's terrible for me to say, but nonetheless, it's true. I think me leaving religion had a big part in it, because I really and truly, Callie, as much as I love you, darling, I don't think, if I was the person now that I was then, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation.
Right.
Yeah. So I think
and that makes me really sad to think about.
Yeah. No, especially when you look at who I am now. You know, it's not something that I'm proud of, but it's something that I have to acknowledge that, hey, that's who I was. But I'm very thankful that I am who I am now because I love you very, very much. You know, I celebrate every victory you have with you. And I'm very happy that I am who I am now because I hate that person that I used to be.
This is exactly why I wanted to have you on.
Sorry, I'm sorry, honey.
No, you're fine. Man, I cry pretty easily, but you got me going here.
I'm sorry.
No, God, no. Trust me, this is exactly why I wanted to have you on because
I'm an asshole and and I would be brutal. Hey, if nothing else, brutally honest.
Right, that's true, and I appreciate that about you.
Yeah.
Man, so something that kind of frustrates me, but is kind of like makes sense. So like, if you look at the polling over, the past however many years and the big shift on people's support of equal rights for gay people, not even necessarily marriage, but just equal rights as far as, anti-discrimination and all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. What you always see is that the reason people change their mind is because they got to know someone.
Right.
And obviously part of that makes perfect sense to me because if you're never exposed to something that's never part of your experience, it doesn't become real to you.
Yeah. But
at the same time, I think I shouldn't have to have met someone to care whether or not they're being treated equally.
I agree, because what it comes back to is you see how shallow some people are. Not only there are some people out there that are as deep as a puddle. Really, I mean, I was one of them. I was as deep as a puddle. I was too busy judging people by the way they looked, or the clothes that they wore, or the way their voice sounded. If they didn't have the right sound that I thought a male should have, if his voice was one or two, octaves higher than I thought it should be, he was instantly labeled, oh, it's just another fag.
Right.
So that was my own bigotry, but I was too busy judging the book by its cover instead of taking the time to go up and go, hi, my name's Bobby, and introduce myself and actually get to know the person. But it took me leaving religion to do that. And it's terrible that that's what it took. Terrible. Because, God, I was such a bigoted asshole back then. Truly, I was. Thank goodness that's a was.
That sounded so like you were about to say thank God.
No. I don't know exactly who the hell I'd think, but that's who Pastor would think. Thank Darwin.
Right. Well, I don't know. But, okay. So talk to me about this too. Speaking of Darwin, mm-hmm. I kind of have this theory about where bigotry comes from sometimes in some ways. And I think there's a pretty solid argument that there's an evolutionary basis for this. The idea of not trusting or being afraid of something or someone who's different than you. Because, if you're proto-human on the Serengeti and something's rustling in the grass, you have two choices. You can assume it's not a threat, or you can assume it is a threat. If you assume it is a threat, you run and you live, whether the thing actually is a threat or not. If you assume it's not a threat, it could be a tiger in the grass waiting to eat you. Mm-hmm. So I think this fear of the unknown is sort of evolutionarily conditioned into us to a certain degree. Obviously, plenty of us have gotten past it in a lot of ways. So that's not to say that it's, programmed into us as human beings and there's no way past it. But I mean, do you think that kind of plays into it?
That makes perfectly good sense to me, because what it does is it triggers that fight or flight syndrome. Mm-hmm. Here you are, you're this one species, and you see something rustling in the bushes. Your first instinct is, oh, hell, and you flee, because, the one thing that we worry about is our bodily autonomy and not being hurt and not being injured, mm-hmm. because we have that desire to live. So, of course, flight. But I can clearly understand how you would think that it had to do with the evolutionary side of it. Because if you look at us now, right, even today, there are people that are afraid of what they don't understand. Look at atheism. Okay, take atheism as an example. Most people they hate atheists. We're the worst things on the planet. Okay, until you meet someone and you don't know they're an atheist and you get to know them. And all of a sudden they become a good friend, and then they tell you, I'm an atheist. You just completely changed everything that person had in their past about atheist. And it was kind of the same thing for me when it came to the LGBT community. I had this preconceived notion, right? Until finally I met someone and I realized, holy hell, they're awesome.
Well, we can be.
Yeah. And then I like, wait a minute, they think the way I think. Holy shit, am I gay? I'm not gay. No, I'm not. You know, but you start recognizing those things that you have in common, that you share a mutual bond with. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, they're not some gay guy or some lesbian standing in the corner. They're now someone that you understand.
They're part of your tribe.
Yeah, you want to get to know them, and all of a sudden that feeling of protection, like, hey, you better not even think about working with them, mm-hmm. You know, because now they become a part of the family, which is kind of like you, Callie. You're part of my family, and nobody better not ever mess with you when I'm around. You know, I'll stick Miss Ashley on them. I'm not the one to worry about.
I was gonna say I feel totally safe around you, but I think Miss Ashley is gonna be the one that you know, if we're gonna, you know, send somebody out to take care of business. Mm-hmm.
Look, you would much rather ride in New York City on a porcupine seat cover. That's with Miss Ashley. Look, 4'9" with a 6'9" attitude, and
right?
Yeah, and trust me, that's a Spitfire in there. Spitfire. Yeah.
Oh God, I love both of you so much. I just want to throw that out there.
Well, trust me, you have our love as well. I can promise you that.
Oh man.
Hey, you know what? We're just a couple country people, you know, that happen to have something to say, and we just happen to become a part of one of the greatest communities on the planet. And there are many people that have no idea what they're missing out on. Never in my wildest dreams would I had imagined that when I left religion, that I would find a community that would be as open, as accepting, and would take me as I am. You know, no warranty needed, you know, as is, they took me just as I am. With my bigoted views, with all of that. And they just kind of took me into arms and said, hey, you know what? Welcome to the family. And I love that aspect of it. And I love the fact that there's people in this community that are completely opposite of what I am. I love that. That's just, you're my family. You're my people. And people need to get over it.
Perfectly said. So you, in 2 weeks, along with me and several other amazing people, are going to be speaking at the Carolina Secular Convention. Do you want to give us a preview of what your talk is going to be about?
I just did. No, my talk is on Southern-based activism. I think it's so important that I think the activist within the atheist community plays such an important role. You know, it's very easy to sit at home and be silent. Me, that's not who I am. You know, I'm very much aware of the fact that if I lost my job tomorrow, that I would never find another job down here. They would Google my name, and you might as well have the definition of atheist with my dumb ass standing up there smiling. You know, so I know the chances of me never finding employment down here is slim to none if I ever lose my job. But for me, I felt that it was more important for me to live authentically, you know, and be who I'm going to be, not be ashamed of who I am, and take that chance than to forever live my life secluded in my own mental closet. Mm-hmm. You know, I would rather be true to who I am. And that's a lot about what my talk is about. It's about being that person and understanding that the battleground is right here in the South. This is our ground zero right here. There's so much religious bullshit going on here in the South that if we leave the South because we're tired of the religious bigotry down here, who the hell is left to fight for equality? No one. The fact of the matter is, we're needed here. And there are so many people that hate that answer. Trust me, I get the emails. They hate that answer. But it doesn't change the fact at all that it's true. If it wasn't for the atheists down here in the Deep South would never change. People are perfectly happy in their little churches. You know, they're perfectly happy looking down their nose at someone who's different from them simply because their Bible says so. And it's time that the southeast of the United States, and I don't know how the Southwest is. I've never been there. But I know the Southeast, it's time for them to wake up. And that is what my talk is about.
Awesome. Well, Bobby, tell me where we can go to listen to No Religion Required.
We are live on Spreaker every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I love being live. I'm so love being live. They can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, of course, on Spreaker, noreligionrequired.com, and also noreligionrequired.secularmediagroup.com. That is where they can find us.
Awesome. And I will have links in the show notes. Bobby, thank you so much
for
coming on the show and making me cry like you always do. I love you too.
You know what? I am always available to you, my darling.
I appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
More Gaytheist Manifesto after this.
I am a voice.
I am a voice.
My name is Jamie Cybers, and I am a voice. I was sexually abused by my father for 2 years, and I am not alone. As a matter of fact, upward of 3 million men in the U.S. have been a victim of rape or sexual abuse. Think that's bad? Try 18 million U.S. women who have been raped or abused.
I am a voice.
In fact, 1 out of every 6 women and 1 out of every 33 men have been a victim. If that wasn't bad enough, only 46 out of every 100 sex crimes are reported to the police. Of that 46, 12 lead to an arrest. From there, only 9 will be prosecuted. 5 will lead to a felony, and only 3 will even spend 1 day in jail.
I am a voice.
I am a voice.
I am a voice.
I am a voice.
Yes, you heard that right. 97% of sexual offenders walk free.
I am a voice.
I am a voice. I am a voice.
It's time to stop being quiet. The more we talk, the more we can make a difference. Visit avoicefortheinnocent.org and share your story. You never know who may draw support from what you have to say.
I am a voice. I am not alone.
I am not alone. I am not alone.
I am not alone.
Don't have a story? Then let people know what we're doing. You may send someone the right direction without even realizing it.
I am not alone.
I am not alone. I am not alone.
I am not alone.
Together we can educate our communities about these crimes, which are far more prevalent than most may think. Together we can help people who have stories that are similar to ours, yet may not know where to turn.
I am a voice. I am not alone.
I am not alone.
I am not alone.
We can raise our voices and let the world know that we are not alone. So stop shutting up. Stop thinking that if you have a story like mine that you have somehow lost your self-worth. You haven't, and neither have I. And we can help everyone else realize that as well. We are a voice for the innocent, and we are not alone.
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Thank you so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gaytheist Manifesto have access to all sorts of cool stuff, like a big shout out on the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons-only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. And welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. So I also this week had the pleasure of having on someone who is a listener, who is a patron, and most importantly is a new friend. Her name is Celeste, and I had her on to talk about what allyship means to us as trans women. Celeste Dreyer, welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hey, Kelly.
So the subject this week is allyship, and Celeste being a trans community friend from the greater Cincinnati area, I thought that she would be a good person to bring on to talk about allyship, what good allies look like, what allies sometimes get wrong, and all of that kind of stuff. So, Celeste, let's start off here. Talk to me about some allyship fails that stick out in your mind. What are some things that you see people who claim to be allies and generally are good, affirming people, and some ways that they sometimes just get things horribly wrong?
Well, the biggest thing you could probably point out is pronouns, but those are really hard to sometimes get with even me. I've messed up pronouns before.
Well, right. I think that's kind of a natural thing, especially if somebody's coming out as in their 20s or in their late teens. I mean, everybody's used to referring to you a certain way, and you're asking them to change that. And sometimes people are perfectly willing to do so, and they just screw up just out of habit. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, I agree. That's okay. It's when they're malicious about it when that becomes a problem. But a lot of allies actually feel terrible when they mess up pronouns. And
right. And sometimes that's like the other side of it, where it's like, no, really all you have to do is correct yourself, apologize, and move on. You don't have to make a big deal.
Yeah. And I've even done that.
Oh, me too.
I've made a big deal.
Yeah, well, and that's something that I think is important to point out, that this segment is definitely not going to be us like standing on a pedestal, like pointing down at everyone like we're these, perfectly politically correct, awesome social justice warriors, and all of you idiots need to get your stuff together. Like, this is definitely not what that is, because I would imagine that any sort of criticism that we would level at otherwise well-meaning people, we are probably guilty of ourselves at one point or another. Would you say that's accurate?
I agree.
So sorry, you go on. I keep interrupting you because I'm a jerk. I apologize.
Oh, whatever. It's fine. I don't normally talk. I try not to talk over people, and I'm not a very assertive person, so
gotcha.
It's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and I'm a raging narcissist, so this works out great.
All right, back to good allyship. Fails. One of the biggest things that have been driving me nuts is someone in my family. They are generally a really good ally, but some of their wording, some of their phrasing, and how they act towards me sometimes does not show that. The biggest example would be blaming me kind of for them having to go to a psychiatrist.
Whoa. So like, is the claim that they're having so much trouble dealing with your transition that they now need to seek help dealing with that?
That's how it sounds to me. I could be reading it wrong, but it's like they'll bring up talking to me and how they're being supportive, and I'm even going to a psychiatrist now, and I'm like, that's great, but you really don't need to bring that up while explaining to me why you're being supportive.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely an oddly timed spot to bring that up. And I mean, I've kind of had a similar experience to that, and this is obviously not necessarily an allyship related thing, but an ex of mine told me that she's on meds and in therapy because of me coming out as trans now, because yeah. But yeah, I've definitely seen that. It's kind of like kind of come off like a martyr complex. Like, look how much I'm doing for you. How can you dare ask me to, not comment on your clothes or, stuff like that? Is it kind of like one of those situations?
It kind of feels like that, but it's more of trying to say, look what I'm doing to help with your situation. It's not, at least from them, it's not to justify another comment they're making, thankfully.
I gotcha. So just kind of well, look how good of an ally I'm being, kind of a thing, and they kind of trying to make it about them as opposed to, yeah. And that's definitely something that I've run into as well. And I mean, that's kind of a fine line to walk, I think, because there is a certain degree to which this journey is kind of about the people that we love and our loved ones, because, I mean, as much as we didn't sign up to be who we are, they didn't sign up to love someone who is trans or anything like that. So there's definitely an adjustment to be made on their part. And I think it's important to be empathetic of that, but there's definitely a line where people start making it about them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably like number one allyship fail is if you're going to be an ally to a cause, the first and most important thing to recognize is that it's not about you. And this can be a super important thing for, it was a journey for me in talking about racism and race issues, because I'm the kind of person who is usually talking about all of the horrible things that society does to trans people and the way that we're treated by others. So I'm always the one pointing out privilege and calling out privilege in other people. And then in a conversation about race, it's my turn to be on the other side of that discussion. And that can be a hard adjustment to make.
Yeah, it can be. I'm kind of on the same situation and all of that.
So yeah, I think the first and most important thing, if we're talking about, what allies sometimes get wrong, it's definitely the, well, this is about me and my feelings, and, and the movement is about me. I think there's definitely a fine line to be walked, but I mean, I've seen LGBT events that are supposed to be for the LGBT community, and they literally do nothing but talk about how great it's a bunch of people patting themselves on the back for being allies, and they don't even actually talk about the trans community or the gay community and what work is actually being done in that way. So, and maybe that was a backwards way to start the conversation. So talk to me about good allyship, like the people in your lives who are cis or who are not queer. Talk to me about what those people get right that make them good allies in your mind.
The best ally is the one that accepts you right off the bat and does not. Man, that's actually a hard question, because that's not a good answer, actually. That's a very hard question.
Yeah, well, because let me see if I can play psychic for a second and guess where you were starting to go and what you realized that made you say that you think that was a bad answer. I'm guessing that you are about to say is that the best allies are the people who never question, who never struggle, who just go with it and are 100% accepting from the get-go. Was that kind of where your answer was headed?
Yeah, that was kind of where my brain was taking me when I thought of a good ally, and then it just, no, that doesn't make sense. Right,
because going back to the other thing, what I'm guessing you realized is like, wait a minute, like...
I mean, a hypocrite.
Exactly. And the reason that it was so obvious to me that that's where you were going is because, I mean, that's a line of thinking that I've gone down. You know what I mean? So trust me, I definitely don't blame you for that. And I mean, these are super complicated issues and questions to deal with. For me, I think the most broad definition of a good ally is someone who, in the frame of the space that they're in, whether it's, the transgender community or in feminism or in queer activism, someone who recognizes that their role is to use whatever privilege they have to advance the interests of that group.
And I think I've got a better answer now that I think about it a little bit more. I kind of
sweet
froze and gave you a horrible answer at the beginning. A good ally is one who's always willing to learn, one who wants to do research, wants to understand you.
Yes, I love that.
One of my best friends, I came out to him, and right off the bat, he started doing research and looking into it, trying to understand what I was going through, and it was amazing.
Yeah, and isn't it so cool when they come to you, when your friends come to you and they ask you questions about things that you haven't talked about yet? It's like, you know that they're doing their research.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that's such an amazing feeling. Because I mean, I've had those kinds of conversations with lots of people who are close to me, and you know, friends tell me like, look, I've been on like every site on the web trying to figure this whole thing out, and you know, it's a weird thing for me to wrap my head around because it's hard for me to imagine that experience, and all of that's cool. You know what I mean? It's about your heart being in the right place and putting in the genuine effort, being willing to learn, being willing to be corrected. So yeah, I think that answer is a really good one.
Yeah, I think that's the answer I'd have to go through or go with from now on. Honestly, is being willing to learn.
Yeah, and you know, something that I see going back to kind of allyship fails in certain ways is I think a lot of times people take it as a personal attack when you say things like, hey, you know, what you said, that like, that's not really cool. Like, I especially run into this often when people want to make jokes about trans people. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I feel like kind of a hypocrite because I make trans jokes. But when I make those jokes, one, they're not usually with, it's a woman with a penis. How funny is that? Like, that's not the punchline. And second of all, it's kind of a coping mechanism because it's like, you have to learn to laugh at yourself in the situations that you're in. Mm-hmm. But people get this idea that's like, well, because it wasn't intended to be malicious, you shouldn't ever be hurt by it. And that's an attitude that I run into far more often than I should. As you know, especially in atheist community circles where people are otherwise, you know, very open and affirming, and it's kind of that whole idea like you're being too sensitive. You need to lighten up. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of that desensitization from the internet almost, because it's things like that are said all the time, and people are just. It's hard to explain it to some people that it hurts you, even though it wasn't hurt them and it wasn't meant to be negative.
Well, right. The way that I kind of explain it to people is, you know, imagine you go out every day as, you know, as an atheist activist, as a trans activist, as a queer activist, as a feminist, as, you know, pick your variety of activism. And you go out and you're fighting against these people who are saying all these terrible things, who, I mean, they want to see you hurt. They want to hurt you. They're not okay with the fact that you exist. And then you come back from that and you see people who profess to be your allies talking the same way. And I think I think sometimes it's hard to make people understand what a sort of jarring experience that can be. Mm-hmm. You know, especially like when there was the big hoopla over Caitlyn Jenner coming out. You know, you would see all the people on the right making all these horrible jokes about, you know, women with penises and blah blah blah. And then I would go into an atheist group and somebody would post a joke about, you know, Caitlyn Jenner having the balls to come out. Ha ha, isn't that funny? And I'm like, no, like, it's not actually funny. And it kind of sucks that you don't understand why that's not funny.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm, you know, I'd sometimes get this reputation in those groups for being the humorless, like joyless feminist buzzkill or whatever. And, you know, I laugh at a lot of stuff. I have a lot of fun. There's just certain things that I don't think are funny. And if you were truly an ally and truly were interested in understanding my experience, you would be willing to shut your damn mouth for a minute and listen to me about why this stuff is hurtful.
Yeah. And honestly, I think everyone's done that at some point. where they've said too much and might realize their mistake, but are in a defensive position and would rather basically take up the stance that what they said isn't trying to be targeting you or being hurtful, but they don't want to realize that it is.
Well, yeah, and I think, I mean, I've been in situations like that before, especially, you know, reflecting on situations where I'm the person who's the ally and I'm the person whose turn it is to stop talking and listen. You know, in situations surrounding racial justice, you know, people would say things and then like, yeah, like that's really not cool to say. And it's like, yeah, but you know, it's just a joke. Why you should lighten up. You should have a sense of humor. And, you know, and it's just one of the things that really, and it's sad that it took this, but one of the things that it took for me to sort of get why my thinking previously was really racist was seeing how people would sometimes treat me as a trans person and condescend to me about how I should deal with my experience and how I should feel about the things people say and do to me. And I'm just like, dude, live my life for a week and then come back and we'll talk. And then I would see the same thing happening to black people, and I would realize that I've done that same thing to black people. And that was kind of a big eye-opening moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some situations, you know, where it's been your turn to be an ally, and how have you sort of navigated those situations?
I guess a big example is I'm running a student organization for trans and gender nonconforming students at NKU.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a lot of gender nonconforming students, people who do not just identify as trans or binary. There are non-binary students. There are agender students. There's actually been a lot more response than I expected, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I'm super, super proud of the work you're doing. That's so cool.
But as a binary trans woman, I could only label myself as an ally to them.
Right.
Beyond that, I have way more privilege than a lot of people there.
Right. Yeah, I've talked about that before where, you know, in some ways, you know, being a binary identified trans person is like you jump out of a box that was built for you into another box, right? Mm-hmm. But you sort of have that safety of the box. And obviously that's a really simplistic way to describe it, because obviously, like, you know, womanhood or manhood doesn't have to mean one specific thing. Mm-hmm. But, you know, generally speaking, if you're a binary identified trans person, you have a pretty clear idea in your head of what transition look like and what you want. And, you know, being a non-binary identified person, I think probably throws up a lot more question marks than you or I would have dealt with during our journeys.
The other privilege I have, I actually am a white middle class college educated woman as well.
Right.
And so there's a lot of people I know in my life that do not, you know, qualify for that either, and they need allies as well.
Yeah, I agree totally. And that's, you know, the thing that I definitely want to make sure is clear, you know, in talking about allyship is, you know, Celeste and I are talking about allyship because we are definitely a member of a group of people who need allies, badly need allies. And we depend on allies in many cases because, you know, I mean, if every trans person on the planet banded together, we might have a lobbying group. You know what I mean? There plainly just aren't that many of us. So it's vital for us to have allies. But I think I would say almost every person on the planet is a member of a group who can be an ally to someone else. You know, whether it's people of color, non-binary identified trans folks, queer people, you know, poor people, religious people, atheists. You know, we all have these intersecting networks of privilege that we can use to help other people. And, that goes just as much for Celeste and I as it does for anyone listening here. So, again, I just want to make it clear that this is not us preaching down from on high as these perfect people who have nothing to learn to all the plebs that need to get their shit together. Like, definitely not what that's about.
And I keep bringing that up just kind of on accident, but it does need to be said.
Well, no, I think that's super important. I mean, if there's one thing to take away from the entire episode, I think is that everybody can be an ally and everybody needs allies to some degree. Unless, see, rich, white, cis, male, Christian. Am I missing anything? If you are that person, if you are super rich, if you're white, if you're Christian, if you're male, if you're neurotypical, able-bodied, all of those things, like, you're probably not hurting for allies too much, but otherwise, I think we can all probably learn to be better to other folks in many different situations. Here's one. Talk to me about you posted something about the college you go to. They allow these religious people on campus to basically yell at people about God and tell them how much they're going to hell. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about that situation as a person who was definitely one of the types of people they were there to antagonize. If you're there and there are 10 people around you who identify as allies, how should those folks handle that situation?
Honestly, I wasn't there for any of the major issues I had with the people being there. They actually would get up into students' faces and shout targeted insults at them. Mm-hmm. I wasn't there for any of this. They called one of my friends an it. Ugh. And the students around her just started chanting, "No, she." And that was amazing to hear
awesome. About. I love that. I mean, it sucks that situation happened, but I mean, that's pretty much the awesome way to deal with it.
Yeah, hearing about that and seeing the response to the student body at NKU, I was never more proud of the student body there.
Yeah, and I think that's important to, speak up and say something, because a lot of times, especially the more vulnerable of us are, someone like me, generally speaking, like, I deal with depression, I deal with anxiety, but they're relatively mild. I have a middle-class job where I make a decent amount of money, not super worried about where I'm going to sleep at night, where my next meal is going to come from. So, I have the capacity, to sit behind a microphone for an hour or 2 hours every week and talk about this kind of stuff. And I have the capacity to get up in people's faces and yell right back at them. But there are many people in our community who just plain don't, because what they're worrying about day to day is how they're going to survive. Mm-hmm. And, where they're going to spend the night, where their next meal is going to come from, if they're going to find a job that'll hire them, that kind of stuff. There are many of us in the community who just don't have the capacity to be in the fight because of those things, because all their energy goes towards surviving. And I think that's why allyship is so important, because we need people to speak up for us and on our behalf in situations like that, where, somebody who's going through an awful situation with a family member or something like that, to then go to college and have somebody yell at you and call you an it, and, to have no one stand up for you. Like, I can't imagine. I'm a pretty sensitive person, even though I'm not necessarily vulnerable in that way. And that would be super hurtful to me. Mm-hmm. I used to be the kind of person that when someone would say, like, the Westboro Baptist Church is coming to protest at, a college near here, and people were organizing a counter protest. I used to be the person who would say, well, why are you giving them the attention they want? Like literally all you're doing is you're giving them the attention they want and feeding into their persecution complex. Like the day that they stop getting attention is the day that they go away. And I felt pretty strongly in that view until I read an article, and I don't remember where it was. And I've tried to find it since and I couldn't, but I read an article on the internet that actually changed my mind on that. Because basically this guy's point was saying, like, imagine a kid walking home from school who's struggling with being gay or being trans or even being atheist. Like, I mean, you're struggling with anything that's sort of like, outside of the default identity that's expected of you as a person. Imagine seeing all of those people protest and saying all those awful things and not seeing anyone in your community respond. And the message that sends to you that no one cares. And that was a pretty profound moment for me. And I was like, wow, if Westboro ever comes to Cincinnati again, I'm joining the counter protest. And that's exactly why. So it was kind of a pretty radical shift in the way that I see things in that way.
Yeah, I actually was the same way in thinking, ignore them and they'll go away. And just thinking about the damage they can do and seeing what they've done, they were making students cry.
Yeah, and I mean, just thinking in practical terms, you know what I mean? Like, it's not just about hurt feelings. I mean, you hurt these kids because in many cases we're talking about kids, you know what I mean? Like, we're not talking about 30 or 40-year-old people who are like battle hardened from the world. You know what I mean?
18 to 20-year-olds.
Exactly. So, they go to class, they can't concentrate, and it ends up really affecting practical things in their lives. Like, it's not just like a temporary hurt feelings kind of situation.
No, it's actual psychological damage.
So, allies, speak up, say something, stand up. Don't be afraid. There is still in some places a social cost for being an ally. And I think that's something that's important to remember. But, if you care about the trans and the queer folks in your lives, it's something that's important, I think. And I hope there's been some insight in here that's, that kind of shows, kind of what to do and what not to do in allyship situations. Did you have any parting thoughts, Celeste? Anything you wanted to go over that you think we might have missed in the conversation?
Well, going back to students getting in between the people who are being harassed, they actually would walk in front of the student because the people that were there yelling at students were getting up and they got into this one girl's face and she was literally completely crying from it. There are people, what I heard, were they were walking in front of them and getting in front of the people they were harassing to basically take the brunt and try to get them to change targets to them. And
so they were trying to deflect, like, the people who were attacking the objects of these people's attacks. They were like trying to deflect the attacks onto them instead. God, that's it sucks that has to happen, but that's freaking awesome.
Yeah,
somebody to do that.
It was. I can't even put into words how proud I am of people.
Man, that's awesome. So I interrupted you again. Were you? Did you just want to bring that up, or was there more of a point?
The point I wanted to make is that's great, but only do that if you can handle it. If you're end up hurting yourself, then make sure while being an ally you don't hurt yourself.
Yeah, self-care is definitely an important thing.
You can't help someone else if you can't help yourself.
Right, and that is a lesson I have learned the hard way several times. Well, Celeste, I definitely want to thank you for taking the time here. I think this has been a great conversation, and I hope folks have gotten a lot out of it. I'm super, super proud of you and the work that you're doing on your college. And let me know if those assholes are supposed to show up again. And we'll organize somebody to come down, and we'll get them taken care of.
Yeah, I definitely will, and I'm definitely going to be contacting people about this as well, because I want to do as much as I can to prevent this from happening again.
All right, good deal. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Next up, your thoughts on being an ally on the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Today in school, I learned a lot. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me. In English, I learned that I'm disgusting. And in physics, I learned that I'm a loser.
Today in school, I learned that I'm ugly and useless. And in gym, I learned that I'm pathetic and a joke. In history, I learned that I'm trash.
Today in school, I learned that I have no friends. In English, I learned that I make people sick. And at lunch, I learned that I sit on my own because I smell. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me.
In biology, I learned that I'm fat and stupid. And in math, I learned that I'm trash.
The only thing I didn't learn in school today?
The only thing I didn't learn today.
The only thing I didn't learn
is why no one ever helps.
Kids witness bullying every day. They want to help, but they don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander at stopbullying.gov.
Here's an excerpt from Nailed by David Fitzgerald.
Didn't there have to have been a Jesus? Perhaps he was just a wandering teacher or an exorcist, an apocalyptic prophet or a zealot who opposed the Romans. Perhaps he was all these things, or even a composite of several such early first-century figures. But at any rate, surely there had to be somebody at the original core of Christianity, arguably the most famous individual in human history. All this seems to be a perfectly reasonable, completely natural assumption to make, so why would anyone be so foolish as to propose that Jesus never existed? Doesn't it just make more sense to assume that there was a historical Jesus, even if we're unable to recover the real facts about his life and death? As it turns out, no. The opposite is true. The closer we look at the evidence for Jesus, the less solid evidence we find, and the more we find suspicious silences and curious resemblances to the pagan and Jewish religious ideas and philosophies that preceded Christianity. And once you begin to parse out the origins of this tradition or that teaching from their various sources, the sweater begins unraveling quickly until it becomes very difficult to buy that there ever was, or even could have been, any historical figure at the center.
Nailed by David Fitzgerald is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
Finally tonight on the show, I wanted to share some of your thoughts on allyship. I made a post on my Facebook page asking for people's thoughts on what allyship means to them and what it means to be a good ally, and I got some pretty good insights. Elizabeth says, "The thing I try to ingrain into fellow allies, I myself am pansexual but cisgender, is that an ally means an advocate with a shield, not a barrier with a megaphone. We always need to stand next to who we are allies of, not in front of. Speak with people, never over." Another thing that I find absolutely infuriating, whether your friend is gay, trans, both, or any variation of the LGBT spectrum, is when someone outs them without permission. It's not your life. Don't do that. You might think it's harmless, but what you're doing at worst is putting them in danger. In the least, you're taking their decisions away from them. Neither are qualities of a good friend or an ally. I think an advocate with a shield, not a barrier with a megaphone, I think that's a brilliant insight. I love that. And I plan on using that. Cameron says, being a gay cis male, I suppose I consider myself a little of both in this situation. I think one of the most important qualities of an ally is the ability to really listen to and appreciate the voices of those they stand for without feeling they're sacrificing their own discretion or autonomy. A lot of people seem to be turned off at the idea of listening to oppressed people because they feel it betrays their own experiences or understanding of the world. Admittedly, it was a difficult concept for me to understand for a long time, and honestly, it just took a lot of thinking to figure it out. But I believe it's an integral part of being a good ally. Allies, I think, need to be aware of their position in society, wherever they are at the intersection of their respective vectors of privilege, so that they can not only avoid wielding it over the less privileged, but understand how they can use their privilege to the advantage of all. I think this takes a bit of the concession from us to realize that allies benefit more from working within the system than we do, and that's not necessarily always a bad thing. All of that within reason, though. I think awareness of privilege as an ally is a delicate balance and often requires a lot of self-reflection and openness to feedback. And I could not agree more. I think a super important component of allyship is the willingness to use whatever platform your privilege gives you, to give that over to the folks that you're being allies to, and to use that to advance the interests of those folks instead of using it as a platform for yourself. Alicia says, I am a heterofluid cis female. I find myself on both sides of the fence, I guess. That's a recurring theme, and that's okay, because I think we're all on both sides of that fence. I think the big thing that annoys me is when someone questions your identity. Have you slept with women? How do you know you're bi? Because I freaking know. Just like you know you're whatever you are. Don't question someone else's identity. It's not your place. And Alicia, I could talk for hours about why that makes sense. Don't question and challenge people's identities. It's a lot of times it's a hard thing to come to terms with who you are, and then to have people who close to you who just blatantly question that's not a comfortable thing. And that doesn't mean don't ask questions to better understand. The idea is to not ask questions to challenge, but just to learn. So David says, to me, it's a two-way street concerning being an ally and being in a marginalized group who is welcoming an ally into the fold. Empathy is a struggle for allies and actual group members alike. Allies should be open to group members' constructive criticism when it is reasonable. Sometimes allies may overstep or speak out of bounds, even with good intention. Group members should remember to act with compassion and give allies the benefit of the doubt when warranted, even at times when the ally may have misspoken. This involves taking into account, for example, an ally's history of advocacy for the marginalized group. Judgment also ties in as well. On both ends, you want people with good judgment and interpersonal skills. For example, sometimes it's appropriate to be aggressive in your ally advocacy, and other times you need to assess when to hold back and let others, actual group members, take the lead. If the intentions are good, the group member, using their judgment and interpersonal skills, should appreciate an ally's effort, even if it is aggressive. The ally should be prepared to receive constructive criticism if, again, their efforts are too aggressive in a detrimental way. And I think being able to accept criticism as an ally is something that's super important. Celeste and I kind of talked about situations where we're used to being the ones in the position telling everyone else to check their privilege and how they can be better allies to us. And that sometimes it's a little bit humbling to have to turn around and realize that you're allies to someone else. And when someone says, yeah, that's not really cool, that's not really okay, you have to be willing to accept that and say, okay, maybe help me understand why that's wrong, or just acknowledge that it is and try to do better. Because at the end of the day, if the idea really is about being an ally and making things better for that group, it's not about you and it's not about your feelings. It's about how you can help those people and how you can make the world better for people like them. Les says, I have to admit that I used to be one of those that thought being gay was a sin. I said stupid shit like love the sinner, hate the sin. When I came out of religion for the first time, I saw what it was like to not be in the majority. I had grown up upper middle class, white, and Southern Baptist. I realized that a girl that I went to high school with was a lesbian, and the ladies that lived next door to my in-laws were as well. They were just people that loved each other and did what they had to do to make it through this world, just like Michelle and I were. I also started listening to Dan Savage, and it was like a smack in the face listening to the questions. Gay, straight, it didn't matter. They all had the same issues when it came to their relationship. They were just two humans learning how to live with each other. I've definitely become an ally of the LGBT community, and I guess the main reason is because I want to be treated with respect as long as I deserve and not be treated like shit just because I'm a little different. Yolanda says, I wasn't always a good ally. Complained about how much of a pain in the ass it was to have to switch pronouns for someone that I've known for a long time, etc., and was basically just a self-centered git. And Yolanda's from Australia. I'm not sure exactly what git means. I'll find that out. It was only for the enduring patience of a beloved friend answering all of my awkward questions years ago and persisting with me even when I'm sure he wanted to smack me over the head until I got it. I know that it's definitely not the job of trans people to be the educators of those around them, but I'll be forever grateful to him for loving me enough to gently point out my douchebaggery and saving my sprog all that heartache. And when Yolanda talks about her sprog, that's Australian slang for kids for our non-Australian listeners. And Yolanda is the fantastic human being. I'm sure so many people read about the birth announcement in the newspaper in Australia where someone's child came out as trans and they posted a corrected birth notice in the newspaper and it went viral. I am proud to say the fantastic lady responsible for that is a friend of mine, and that's Yolanda. Kessie, short and simple. I guess I'm an ally because life is hard enough for each of us, and if I can make it a little easier for anyone, it's a good day. I'm way into that. Ryan says, I'll start by saying that I wasn't always an ally. I was raised a good conservative Christian and thought that in order to make my parents happy, I had to believe what they believed. But as I started to look at my friends and realize how much my hate the sin, love the sinner speech was just as hurtful as someone's God hates fags speech, I stepped back and took a look around and did some soul searching. And I realized that if I have the freedom to love who I want as a hetero male without being harassed or condemned, then why shouldn't my LGBTQ friends and family as well? I decided that it was time that I stop hating my friends for who they were and start loving them. And to me, loving your friend isn't simply telling them that they are loved and accepted, but also fighting with and for them in every battle they may face, be it adoption, job opportunities, marriage, or even harassment. Love is not just a word, it is action, and standing by while they get tore down is not action. Now, this has slowly led to me questioning and leaving the Christian faith, but that is another story for another time. Claire says, allyship is a continuum, a lifelong process. There isn't one criterion. You can go from being a tentatively supportive friend family member or having a theoretically supportive position for an oppressed member of society, being a basically decent human, in other words, to being a full-blown outspoken advocate for people who are experiencing oppression, someone who seeks to leverage their privilege toward getting rid of unequal privileges, politically, economically, socially. The way you get from one point on this continuum to a deeper one is by learning to listen to others' experiences and not dismiss them just because they're different from your own, as Cameron mentioned up thread. Furthermore, ally is not an identity. I'm a queer / mostly gay / genderqueer / agender / I don't even know human. But even though I experience oppression, I too need to be an ally to people in my communities, people who share my experiences and people who don't. I need to be an ally to communities I don't belong to, for example, to people of color. It's about the actions I take to listen and magnify others' voices and needs, not about a badge or label I can wear on my sleeve. Ally should really be a verb, not a noun. So I don't think it's like you're a good ally or you're not. F those binaries. Yes, there are people who are decidedly unsafe or antagonistic. But I like to think that just like George mentioned above me on this thread, those people are allies that just don't know it yet, just haven't quite moved to a positive number on the continuum. The question is not, am I good enough as an ally? Because that centers around your identity and your ego, not your behavior. The question should be, what more can I do? How can I be a better listener? How can I gain a greater understanding of what they're going through? How can I do more to show my support of my fellow humans? That's my understanding of allyship. And my response was, sigh. This is why I love you, Claire, because there's literally nothing I can add to that. Kayla says, to me, being a good ally means being aware of my privilege, standing up against discrimination, always being open and accepting. It's good, simple, and concise, and I love it. And finally, I want to read here what George posted. And it kind of hit me when I read this, because I'm an emotional person and that's what I do. But I think this is sort of tidies up the question on, religiosity and acceptance of the LGBT community and how harmful these things can be sometimes. George says, I used to be a conservative evangelical. I remember arguing with my then future brother-in-law about how him being gay was a sin and a choice and whatnot. I was so proud to be towing the party line. I remember how hard it was to choke down the sick feeling in my stomach when he got so upset that he walked out of the car and walked home. But choke it down I did, and even managed to convince myself that I was a victim there, and it was an attack from Satan that I felt so badly for merely carrying God's message. When I realized I was no longer Christian, before I realized I was an atheist, one of the first things I did when I walked away from my faith was to apologize to him for that. And I hope you were able to mend those fences, George. I really do. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. Again, I want to thank my guests Bobby C. and Celeste Dreyer, and big shout out to Caitlin McKenna. Welcome to the family. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. Quick note about the email address. Someone reached out to me and mentioned that there's no way really to get a hold of me directly that seems to be private or safe. And I just want to make it known that the gaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com, I'm the only person who has access to that email. So if you want to reach out, make sure that I get it, and you want to do so safely and anonymously, you can safely email that address, and I'll be the only one that gets it. And I take privacy and anonymity very, very seriously, so no one will read your post or read your email aside from me unless you give explicit permission. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I am on Twitter at GaytheistCali, and you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.